America's Godly Heritage. Today we are going to be looking at the Pilgrim's Progress, specifically the historical background of the author, John Bunyan, and why he wrote the book. Previous editions of the Pilgrim's Progress, we have looked at the book as a whole and what it's about, and the historical background in terms of the conflict between the Catholic Church and the Reformers over several centuries. But today we are specifically going to be looking now at England and John Bunyan. So Bunyan was born in 1628 in Elstow, England. Elstow is basically now a suburb of Bedford, England, and Bedford is about an hour's drive north of London. It's in a beautiful part of the country. His father was a tinker. He would repair pots and pans. He wasn't like the tinkers that would go in the cart around from town to town, and they kind of had a bad reputation. He stayed put and he repaired pots and pans. That's not exactly a job that's going to bring in a whole lot of money, but he and his wife were able to scrape enough money together to make sure that John Bunyan went to school for a while. He got an education. Bunyan, later on, when he's writing about his life, he said he was not the most moral of people. In fact, he was a bit of a stinker as a kid and as a teenager. He writes about himself. He had few equals for cursing, swearing, lying, and blaspheming the holy name of God, and that until his marriage he was the very ringleader of all the youth that kept him company in all manner of vice and ungodliness. In 1644, when Bunyan was just 15 years old, he suffered 3 traumas that had a profound effect on him. First, his mother died in June. Then his younger sister Margaret died in July. Well, that kind of stinks. And then his father remarried in August. Bunyan and his new stepmother didn't get along very well. So these events led to Bunyan leaving home and joining the military. During this time, the English Civil War was going on between the Roundheads, who supported Parliament, and the Cavaliers, who supported the king. He was then sent to reinforce a garrison, so it is believed that he did not see much military action. Undoubtedly, during his 3 years of military service, he was exposed to Puritan beliefs, because many of his fellow soldiers and his officers were all Puritans, and they were not quiet about their beliefs. He picked the winning side. Not long after his discharge from the army, he got married. He was in this kind of a condition where he was saying he was a moral mess, and yet somehow he caught the eye of a lovely young lady who was a devout Christian. Despite the big differences in their characters, she did marry him. He says in his autobiography, "Grace abounding to the chief of sinners," he and his first wife came together as poor might be, not having so much household stuff as a dish or spoon betwixt us both. His wife did, however, bring him 2 evangelical books as her dowry. This is a pretty poor dowry in terms of finances, but a very rich dowry in terms of spiritual heritage. She was so strong in her faith, and he loved her so much, she was able to bring him into the Christian faith as well. There was about a 4-year period of time where Bunyan went into a deep spiritual struggle within himself, going back and forth about what he thought about things and his moral character, and if God is Israel, what does that mean for me? He actually describes all of this in Grace Abounding to the Chief of Sinners. He also talks about it a bit in Pilgrim's Progress. As he began to give up what he considered to be frivolous activities, such as sports and bell ringing, he was a wild one. He began to concentrate on his inner spiritual life. He was then caught in what he called storms of temptation, such as hearing voices which urged him to blaspheme. Eventually, he emerged from this period of spiritual darkness, and he was aided in his recovery by John Gifford, the leader of the Bedford Separatist Church. Since Gifford had also led a sinful life followed by a profound spiritual crisis, he was uniquely able to understand and help Bunyan. In Pilgrim's Progress, he actually modeled the character evangelist after John Gifford. Gifford became his mentor and taught him about the Bible, taught him about the Puritan theology, and brought him into the church where he was the leader in Bedford, England. Bunyan joined the church in 1655 and soon proved his talents as a lay preacher. Since he had been through deep spiritual troubles himself, he was in a good position to teach and console others. He also became known for his public debates with the Quakers and Baptists in the area. Over the next 8 years, they had 4 children. And then, unfortunately, Bunyan's wife died. A little while later, Bunyan married his second wife, Elizabeth. When Cromwell died, the monarchy was reestablished. Charles II was restored to the throne in April 1660. He was another quite of a ratbag of a king. Sorry, but he was not a great king. All he really wanted was to clamp down and get control again. So the religious freedom that the Puritans had enjoyed for a few years under Cromwell and under the Commonwealth was all shot down again. The king began putting people in prison, and Bunyan ended up in prison in November 1660 because he would not recant his beliefs and join the Church of England. He ended up being in prison for 12 years because he refused to recant his beliefs. Now imagine, poor Elizabeth. She's got his children. She has very little way of making money because women weren't supposed to have jobs outside the house then. And Bunyan's in prison, so he can't make all that much money either. He does manage to make a little bit of a living by making and selling long tagged laces and writing some books, including the one I just mentioned, Grace Abounding to the Chief Sinners. Bunyan was in jail close enough to the family home that the family could go and visit him. This is when he started writing the chapters of Pilgrim's Progress. He wrote them so when his children came to visit him in jail, he would have a way of entertaining them. As I said before, Pilgrim's Progress is not an easy book. It has some very deep theological things going on in it. And as a grown-up, as an adult, there are some things I really have to think through and process and talk about to get my teeth into it. It boggles my mind that this is supposed to be a children's book. Finally, Elizabeth was able to get him a royal pardon, and he was able to get out of jail. Bunyan was released from prison in March 1672 under Charles II's declaration of indulgence to the nonconformists. The Bedford community had already chosen him as their new pastor in January, and they were able to obtain a meeting house. In May, he received a license to preach. Of course, he immediately went right back to being a preacher, and he had a kind of a circuit that he would travel around the countryside preaching to lots of different groups about the gospel, and he picked up the nickname Bishop Bunyan. The problem, of course, is he was back in jail 5 years later. He was only there for 6 months this time, but he's able to spend his time editing and preparing for publication Pilgrim's Progress. It was published just a few months after he got out of prison. And as I said before, 6 years later he wrote a sequel to it, which is Christian's Wife Christiana's Journey. This was published in 1684. The books were bestsellers, but it continued to sell and continued to sell and continued to sell over the centuries because people have found it to be such a valuable book in helping them with their Christian faith and encouraging them in their spiritual journeys. Unfortunately, Bunyan did die relatively young because he went out one day and he was trying to reconcile a father and a son. As he was out trying to get to their home, he got caught in this torrential downpour and then caught a cold, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse, and then he died in 1688. He died living out what he believed. That is the one good thing in all of this, is he did die actually behaving like a true Christian pastor, trying to reconcile a father and a son. But he did leave behind an abundance of writings, including profitable meditations, Christian behavior, the Holy City, and of course, Pilgrim's Progress. Thank you for listening to this edition of America's Godly Heritage. I hope you have a great day. Bye. If you would like to help support America's Godly Heritage or to view the resources used to make this podcast, just go to patreon.com or vimeo.com and type America's Godly Heritage in the search box. You can also make financial donations at givesendgo.com. Again, just type America's Godly Heritage in the search box. We really appreciate your support. Thanks again. Bye.